Welcome, deep divers. You've really put in a ton of work in SOC 101, and we know that final exams coming up fast. But here's the good news. This deep dive today, it's designed just for you. Think of it as your strategic final exam review. What we want to do is help you focus on the big themes and, really importantly, how sociology helps us understand the real world all around us. It's not just about memorizing names and dates, it's about seeing those connections.
That's exactly right. Making those connections between sociological ideas and, well, just everyday life. That's not only good exam prep, it's how you really start thinking like a sociologist. So we'll revisit some key concepts, key thinkers you studied, and link them up with practical examples. Hopefully that solidifies your understanding, yeah. For the exam, sure, but also for how you see things moving forward.
Okay, sounds great. Let's unpack this, starting with our first major theme: gender, race, and class inequality. When we look at these categories, sociology tells us it's not just about, individual characteristics, is it? It helps us see them as these powerful social constructs. They shape pretty much everything. So when we talk about gender as a social construct, what does that actually mean in practice? How do we see it day to day?
Well, what's really fascinating is that it means gender isn't just like simple biology. It's about how society teaches us what it means to be a man or a woman. Think about it, our gender roles, they're learned, right? Through family, school, the media, everything. And studies, both anthropological and sociological, they consistently show it's mainly culture, these social expectations, not just biology, that drive the differences we observe.
That makes a lot of sense. And we see that playing out in what Paula England calls the gender revolution. Right, she talks about these big shifts in the gender system, but points out it's been, uneven, almost stalled sometimes. Why is that? What's the holdup?
Yeah, her core insight is really important here. While women have definitely moved into jobs that used to be mostly male, think management, law, medicine, that change has been much, much slower in working class jobs. And the so what part of that is this. Jobs traditionally done by women often get devalued, they pay less, so there's a big incentive for women to move into those male jobs for better pay, better status, but there's much less incentive for men to take on traditionally female roles or jobs, so the change is sort of lopsided. That's why you see, way more women becoming doctors than men becoming nurses or, say, kindergarten teachers.
That's a really clear look at how gender structures opportunity.
Yeah.
But, when we think about identity and social structure, race is just as profound, isn't it? We've talked about symbolic ethnicity, which sounds maybe a bit lighter, more of a choice. But then you have W.E.B. Du Bois and his idea of double consciousness or two-ness. What's the key difference there? Why is Du Bois's idea so lasting?
Oh, it's a really crucial distinction. Symbolic ethnicity, like Mary Waters describes it, it's often something voluntary for, say, white Americans, like wearing green on St. Patrick's Day. It's a choice. It feels good, and it doesn't usually carry a big social cost. But Du Bois's double consciousness for African Americans, that's fundamentally different. It's this unique tension, this feeling of your identity being split, being both an American and a Negro, as he put it, always seeing yourself through the eyes of a society that judges you based on race.
So definitely not a choice. It's more like an imposed way of seeing yourself and the world seeing you.
Exactly. It captures that deep psychological and social weight of living in what he called a color-line society, where your racial identity constantly shapes how you're seen, how you experience the world, and even how you see yourself. It really highlights that core sociological point. Race isn't just cultural preference. It often dictates life chances.
And speaking of identity shaping expectations, Lianzu's concept of the success frame for Asian Americans is fascinating too. It describes these really specific high achievement goals. What does that frame actually look like? And are there downsides to having such a clear, prescribed path?
Yeah, the success frame is basically how many Chinese and Vietnamese immigrant parents and their kids define what academic success is. And it's super specific. Getting into a top university, UCLA, Berkeley, Harvard, places like that, and then going into a top profession, usually doctor or lawyer. What's kind of surprising is how powerfully this frame is supported by what they call ethnic resources. Things like extra tutoring, supplementary education. It helps families overcome class disadvantages. But here's where it gets really interesting. The cost. For kids who can't meet that frame or maybe choose not to, they can feel really conflicted, at odds with their parents, even their own sense of ethnic identity. Because achievement and ethnicity get so tightly bound together, it creates a lot of pressure.
Wow, yeah, that sounds like intense internal pressure. Okay, let's shift gears now. Let's talk power, politics, and capitalism. These aren't just abstract theories. They really structure our lives. Take Karl Marx. His analysis of capitalism points to this fundamental split, right, between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. What's the core thing Marx is telling us about how capitalism works, and why is conflict so central for him?
Marx's fundamental insight is that capitalism isn't just about economics. It inherently creates conflict. It's built into the system. He saw society divided into these two main groups: the bourgeoisie, who own the means of production, the factories, the capital, and the proletariat, the workers who only have their labor to sell. Marx argued the proletariat was like the special product of modern industry. And the so what is that capitalism, for Marx, relies on exploitation. Workers create the value, but they only get a small part back as wages. The owners get the rest. So you have this built-in antagonism, this constant struggle. He described capitalist control as potentially despotic, quite absolute. And workers trying to organize, like in early trade unions, they often faced really harsh resistance, legally and socially, from the capitalist class.
So for Marx, conflict isn't a bug, it's a feature of capitalism. Okay. Now, Max Weber gives us a different angle on capitalism's rise, connecting it to the Protestant ethic. How could something like religious beliefs, specifically Calvinist asceticism, have played such a big role in shaping our whole economic system?
It's a really fascinating argument Weber makes. He said that the discipline, methodical, hard work that fueled early capitalism had deep roots in a specific religious idea: Calvinist asceticism. The belief was, that you could demonstrate your faith, your salvation, through relentless, disciplined work in your worldly calling, your beruf, as he termed it. It wasn't just a job, it was like a divine duty. This created this powerful psychological sanction, almost a spiritual push, for intense labor and saving, not spending. It framed business activity as righteous, and it, maybe ironically, helps legitimize exploiting workers' willingness to work hard, driving up productivity. The big insight: culture, beliefs, they can really shape economic structures in profound ways.
And fast forwarding to today, how does technology fit into these power dynamics? Jesse Daniels' work on algorithmic radicalization sounds, pretty concerning. How does she argue the tech industry, which often sees itself as neutral, actually created pathways for extremist groups?
Yeah, Daniel shows something quite counterintuitive. The tech industry often aimed for, a raceless internet, a neutral platform, but the actual infrastructure they built inadvertently provided openings for white supremacist groups like Stormfront to really spread their message. These groups were often early adopters, using new online tools very effectively to organize and recruit. So the insight is technology isn't neutral. Its design, its use, it can actually amplify existing biases and extremist views, even if that wasn't the intention.
That's a really critical point about tech's social role. Okay, staying with power but shifting slightly, let's quickly touch on democracy types and civil rights. We hear these terms a lot. What are the key distinctions we should remember?
Good idea. So basically, with democracy, you've got participatory democracy, think direct decision-making, like a town hall. Everyone gets a say. Then there's representative democracy, which is what most of us live in, where you elect people to make decisions for you, like members of Congress. And civil rights. Those are the legal rights everyone holds as a citizen. The right to vote is a huge one, which the 19th Amendment secured for women, for example. These define how power is shared or contested in society.
And these power dynamics also show up in local nationalism, which can look pretty different depending on the context. Can you give us a quick example or two?
Sure. Think about Hindu nationalism in India. It often uses Hindu religious symbols and motifs, sometimes resists outside influences, and focuses on political goals to build a specific kind of national religious identity. Contrast that with, say, Buddhist movements in Thailand. There, monks sometimes served the state, but other times they led major protests against the state, like the Saffron Revolution. It just shows how religion can be mobilized in really different ways, politically speaking.
Interesting how those large forces play out locally. All right, let's move on to education and parenting. These feel really personal, right? But sociology shows they're also shaped by these bigger social forces. What does sociology tell us about, say, the value of a college degree through ideas like credentialism or the hidden curriculum? What's really going on there?
That's a great question. Credentialism is this focus on the degree itself as a job requirement, sometimes even more than the actual skills learned. The diploma acts as a signal, right? A signal that you're disciplined, trainable, you can follow rules. And the hidden curriculum, while maybe not explicitly named in all your readings, is definitely at play. Think about how universities might rely on parents for fundraising or support. That teaches students about social networks, about navigating institutions, things that aren't in the official syllabus. It subtly reinforces certain advantages beyond just academics.
So it's not just what's in the textbook, but also learning the rules of the game and who you know. That clicks. Laura Hamilton's work on helicopter parenting really gets into these different strategies parents use for college. What are some of her main types, especially those professional helicopters?
Right. Hamilton identifies these different parental visions for college. The professional helicopters are, well, very involved. They often tie financial support directly to grades and career-focused majors, and they actively try to manage risks for their kids, social risks, academic risks. They're almost like project managers for their child's college career, aiming for optimal professional outcomes. This is different from her paramedic parenting type, who might be less involved earlier but then swoop in during college, usually when there's a problem.
Project managers, yeah, that sounds about right. Her research shows how this can actually deepen inequality in higher ed, doesn't it? How does this sort of privatization of college contribute to existing class and racial gaps?
Yes, that's a key finding. As higher education becomes more privatized, relying more on tuition and private money, it tends to magnify existing inequalities, both class and race-based. For example, she finds students from less wealthy backgrounds might get funneled into what she calls the party pathway. It offers social life, but often leads to weaker job prospects after graduation. Maybe low-skill jobs or struggling to find work. Meanwhile, wealthier parents can smooth the path for their kids with job connections, funding unpaid internships, providing that crucial financial buffer. Interestingly, she also notes that less privileged students attending regional campuses sometimes find better social footing and get higher GPAs, suggesting different routes matter.
That's a really stark picture of how advantage can reproduce itself, almost invisibly sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting, I think, moving to religion and spiritual belief systems. Christian Smith offers a specific definition of religion. What is it? And why does he argue religion might be sort of natural for humans?
Smith defines religion as this complex of culturally prescribed practices, and these practices are based on beliefs about superhuman powers. Key point. These powers are superhuman because they can do things humans can't, and they don't depend on us. People engage in these practices, he argues, to connect with these powers, hoping for good things, trying to avoid bad things. His really interesting idea is that religion might be natural because of our unique human makeup. We have the capacity to imagine such powers, and we also have limitations that make us seek help beyond ourselves. He also talks about compatibilism, the idea that religious views and social science aren't necessarily enemies, they can actually inform each other. And just because some aspects of religion, like maybe community events, decline, that doesn't automatically mean society is fully secularized. It might just be changing form.
So it's more than just belief. It's a system of practices tied to something deep in human cognition. And connecting back to Weber, his concept of the religious calling, the Beruf, fits here too, right? We touched on it earlier, but how did that idea evolve and really shape the modern way we think about work?
Exactly. We saw how Weber linked Beruf to demonstrating faith through worldly work in the Protestant ethic. Over time, that idea of a calling kind of secularized but stayed powerful. It morphed into our modern work ethic, this notion that your job should be more than just income. It should be meaningful, purposeful, something you're called to do. That legacy drives a lot of our contemporary attitudes towards work, pushing for dedication and finding fulfillment through careers.
That's a powerful legacy indeed. And of course, there are many different kinds of religious movements. Can you give us a quick rundown of a few key types?
Sure. You have world-rejecting movements. These tend to be pretty exclusive, critical of mainstream society, and very demanding of members. Sometimes they form total institutions where the group controls almost all aspects of a member's life, requiring strict rules, maybe even withdrawal from the outside world. Then there's something like Sufism. It's a mystical tradition within Islam where the focus is on achieving a deep personal closeness to God, often through practices aimed at transcending the self. And another important type is liberation theology. This is a perspective primarily within Christianity, where the church actively sides with the poor and oppressed. It interprets religious stories as calls to challenge unjust social structures, often emphasizing that right action leads to right belief.
Okay, so all these big forces, inequality, power, education, religion, what does it all mean for something really basic like our health? Let's wrap up the themes with health, illness, and inequality. Braveman and colleagues argue health is shaped by much more than just individual choices. What are these social determinants of health?
Braveman and her co-authors really drive home the point that our health, physical and mental, isn't just about our genes or lifestyle choices. It's heavily influenced by socioeconomic factors. Things like, can you afford healthy food? Do you live in a safe neighborhood? Do you have access to good healthcare, quality education? These are all social determinants. The key insight is how much our social position, our environment, shapes our health outcomes, often more powerfully than individual willpower alone.
And sociologists also use terms like the sick role and health legitimacy. How do those help us understand illness in a social context?
Right. These concepts help us see how society deals with illness. The sick role refers to the expectations placed on someone who is ill. Like, you're usually exempt from normal duties, say work or school, but you also have an obligation to try to get better, maybe seek medical help. Health legitimacy is about whether society generally accepts an illness as real or valid. A broken arm, highly legitimate. Something like chronic fatigue syndrome might face more doubt or skepticism. It shows illness isn't just biological, it's also a social status with rules and expectations.
And sometimes, tragically, we see how structural problems within healthcare itself have devastating impacts. The story of Henrietta Lacks and her HeLa cells is just a staggering example.
It's an incredibly important and deeply troubling case. It starkly illustrates structural racism in medicine and massive ethical failures. Henrietta Lacks was an African-American woman whose cancer cells were taken in 1951 without her knowledge or consent. These cells, HeLa cells, were unique. They could reproduce endlessly in labs. They were immortal. They became absolutely vital for decades of medical research, polio vaccine, cancer research, genetics, so much more. Yet her family knew almost nothing about this for decades. They received no compensation, weren't part of the conversations about tissue ownership or the ethics involved. It's a painful example of how medical progress was, in this case, built on exploiting a vulnerable person and her community. It raises huge questions about consent, rights, and equity that are still relevant today.
That story really hits home the so what of sociology, doesn't it? How these big structures impact lives in the most fundamental ways. Okay, let's pivot to the final exam itself. What are the practical things our listeners need to know?
All right, let's get practical. The final exam, it's 80 multiple choice questions. You'll have 90 minutes. That works out to about a minute to a minute and a half per question. So you need to pace yourself. Good news. You can use your notes, your textbook, other class materials. So definitely get those organized beforehand. That's really key. What you absolutely cannot use are AI tools. No ChatGPT, no Copilot, none of that. My best advice, trust the preparation you've done. Really try to apply your sociological imagination, connect these concepts to real life, see the links between personal experiences and broader social forces. That's how you truly understand this stuff, not just memorize it.
Absolutely. And remember, final exams can feel stressful. We get that.
Yeah.
But this exam is really designed for you to show what you've learned, how you've learned to think sociologically this term.
Exactly. Sociology is about making sense of the complex world we live in. These concepts we've talked about today, they're your tools for doing that. You've learned a lot. You are ready for this.
You really are. You've put in the effort all term. Thank you for diving deep with us. Go show what you know on that exam. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Think about how understanding these sociological ideas doesn't just help you pass a test. How does it change how you see yourself, your community, the whole society? It really can empower you to understand the world differently and maybe even play a part in shaping it.